Good evening. Welcome to our ongoing coverage of Kivumbi 2017. It's now a little after 8 o'clock. I'm Yvonne Okwara Matole. Today, the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission declared Uhuru Kenyatta the winner in the repeat presidential poll alongside his running mate, William Ruto. Uhuru garnered 7,483,895 votes, translating to 98.26% of the total votes cast. The final tally and declaration came in 4 days after that poll that was boycotted by 25 constituencies in 4 counties, where opposition support remains high. The IEBC chairman, Wafula Chebukati, has indicated that the results would not be altered by an election in the said counties where voting did not take place on the 26th of October. Uhuru, meanwhile, has dismissed the local and international narrative of a low voter turnout, terming it a ploy meant for political convenience. The president-elect says his win is a validation of his August victory, which was annulled by the Supreme Court. Let's take a look at what both of them had to say.
Again, I hereby declare Mr. Uhuru Kenyatta and Mr. William Samoei Ruto as President-elect and Deputy President-elect, respectively.
And that the law is a direct expression of the general will of all. And with this painful reasoning, I submitted myself to the general will as expressed through our Constitution. And this is how the October 26th election was made possible. It is an expression, fellow Kenyans, of the general will of all. And this general will included the right to vote, but also the right not to vote. The road to October 26th was not easy. Indeed, our own parliament, comprising our Senate and National Assembly, as the lawmaking organ of our nation, took the legislative critique by the Supreme Court seriously, and they embarked to correct the legislative challenges to our election laws.
We're going to talk about this tonight over the course of the next hour, and here is who we'll be speaking to. Our lead reporter on the show tonight, Sophia Wanuna, will be speaking with Senate Majority Leader, that is Senator Kipchumba Murkomen, getting his reaction to that win. We'll also be speaking to the Senator of Homa Bay County, that is Senator Moses Kajwang, his reaction. In fact, his county did not participate in this election. That's the first part of the show. And then, after talking about the politics, we'll have the legal conversation, answering the legal questions with Kibe Mungai and Steve Ogola. That is a little later on in the show. But first, the political reactions to this win. Sophia Wanuna with Senate Majority Leader. Kipchumba Murkomen, thank you very much, Senator, for making time for us. And let's begin with 26th of October. You, President Uhuru Kenyatta, re-elected, according to the announcement today by the National Returning Officer for the presidential election. Does this win feel the same as the one on August the 8th?
Well, this is even more significant for us. You know for sure that the president had already won on August 8th. So the question was, can that win be confirmed? And so the significance of this win is important for us. But most importantly, this election was no longer about the winning for Uhuru Kenyatta. It was the fight for democracy. It was actually the fight for our constitutional order and constitutionalism. It reached a stage where The question was whether elections can be held. The reason why we must celebrate today is that finally, as a nation, we've come to the conclusion that any single individual who is greater than our constitution or greater than the country and the supreme law. And therefore, it's a strong message to any person who would like to blackmail the country, hold the country at ransom, that it's no longer possible under this constitution to hold the country at ransom. So these celebrations, these elections, is more than the victory of Uhuru Kenyatta. It's a victory of constitution, it's a victory of democracy, it's the right to vote, and that it is significant also in the sense that many people felt that as a result of the nullification of this election, just never happened in so many countries, just 4 or so countries in the world, that our country would be ripped apart.
Right.
But the other great significance for this is that there has been relative peace, except, of course, for the 4 counties that are unable to vote.
Yeah. However, the president in his speech appearing to already anticipate a challenge to this victory. So what is the preparation, if at all, there is a petition challenging the election?
Well, we are ready like we were before August 8th for any election petition that will come. We believe that the courts and the country has learned from what happened on August 8th insofar as the significance of numbers and elections is concerned, and that we will go through that process. The judges are intelligent enough to be able to look at the law. And what is really bothering me most is that, like the president spoke, their numbers were not nullified on August 8th. It was just processes of how forms are processed and so forth. So I'm hoping that this time round, the courts will give greater significance to the right of every voter. And I heard the former Prime Minister speak the other day and say that the voice of every voter must be heard. And every voter who went to the polling station this time round must be heard.
Yeah. You talk about processes, and the Constitution is very clear about what is considered to be an election, that it must be conducted in 290 constituencies. That has not happened in this case. So on one hand, whilst the chairman said it would have no effect on the final result, even if all those votes went to a different candidate, the election did not happen in all constituencies against what is considered to be due process for an election to be duly regarded as such.
That definitely will be the motivating factor, for example, for someone who is going to go to court. I want to caution you, though. There is nothing like the law is clear. There is nothing like the Constitution is clear. It will depend on the interpretation that will take place in the courts. And for this purpose, most of us believe that when Article 138 says that elections shall be conducted in every constituency, it means that the IEBC must discharge its responsibility to provide an election infrastructure in every constituency so that any voter who would like to vote can vote. It doesn't mean, however, that everybody must be forced to vote. Number 2, it never anticipated a situation where it never validates a situation where violence, intimidation and force can be used to be able to prevent elections. Now, the question which definitely will appear before court is that did IEBC try to provide election infrastructure in the 4 counties or the 25 constituencies, and the evidence that will be presented by IEBC will be relevant for that purpose. Was there violence? Was that violence sponsored by any party that was part of the elections? And who is seeking to nullify these elections? Because, you know, a voter will go there to say a victory was, so-and-so victory was stolen. But to whose benefit? The number 2 was the one who sponsored the violence. So there is no way they can be able to beneficiary of that violence to say that their votes or so forth. In fact, there is a case that was filed by Jubilee supporters that relates to contempt of court. I hope no one will try to imagine that NAS as a party or ODM as a party was not given a chance to run because they didn't like IEBC and so forth, because they are already in contempt of court. The elections must be done in 60 days. So I don't actually anticipate a situation where an ODM or ODM member will be in court to start with. So then let's go to the situation where another voter will be in court for that reason. Then the question will be, did IEBC provide the infrastructure, which they did? Okay. So to the extent that IEBC, the security apparatus, because the security people would have forced an election, literally, you know, put all the military there and so forth. But you saw what was happening. There's evidence in public that people were saying we formed youth groups with the commander and so forth, to the extent that the election could not be done. But I must concede as a lawyer that that is part of the arguments. There will be an argument, of course, on the side of the person who goes to the court. It will be now upon the court to make a decision based on the weight of evidence that is provided before them.
When I was coming here, I met a number of youth celebrating this victory, and perhaps half the country is celebrating the re-election of President Kenyatta. However, you have another half that doesn't even recognize this process, doesn't think it should have taken place. What is the plan?
First of all, I disagree that half of this country do not recognize this process. I think that is not true. 91% of the polling stations voted, so 9% only never voted. Or the constituencies, 91% participated in elections. Migori County, for example, 2 constituencies fully participated in the elections, and the others, the violence. The Kuria constituency participated, the other parts of the county did not. So the question of what is the number of people who participate? Number 2, does participation include abstaining? Yes, indeed. In August the 8th, 4 million people abstained from coming to the vote. Nobody talks about that as a basis of the validity of that elections. In 2013, there were about 4 million people who never came to vote. So participation or not is not a basis of recognition. In fact, most of the people who consciously refused to come and vote recognized that there was an election and they didn't want to participate in it. If they didn't recognize...
Because they did not recognize or appreciate it to be one conducted in accordance to what they believe is free and fair.
I don't believe so.
Yeah.
I believe that they felt that they will achieve their objective by abstaining. Yeah? The candidate thinks that it's not free and fair. The supporters believe that we will frustrate this election and have another one in 90 days if we don't come. And their coming to vote for their candidate would have actually frustrated what they were intended to achieve.
So we move on just as if everything is okay?
It is not us to determine whether everything is okay. It's the Constitution is okay. If the Constitution is faulty, there's a process of amending that Constitution.
Now, what about the spirit of the Constitution as opposed to the letter of the Constitution?
What do you think the spirit of the Constitution is?
To unite the country. At the end of the day, definitely. You can follow it to the letter, but if the spirit to have one Kenya, you'll tear apart that same country you seek to follow the law for, isn't it?
I'm just saying, we need to agree one thing, Sophia, that we are done with elections. Now let's discuss another agenda, which is how can we better unite this country? This country, in the places where we think that there was discord or disagreement, it had nothing to do with elections. I mean, parts of northern part of the country had a lot of cattle rustling for so many years, and as I had it, was that a basis of elections? It's not. So the process of uniting the country is looking at things that are more than elections. You know, it's about development of the areas, employment of youth, access to resources, question of cattle rustling, and many other things. It is not because of these elections that we need to seek to unite the country. Right. Our agenda when we came to office in 2013 was based on uniting the country. We have achieved to a certain extent. The President Uhuru Kenyatta was asking for this vote to facilitate or enable him to continue that journey of uniting the country.
Yeah. President Uhuru Kenyatta, again, today in his speech after being declared president-elect, saying he'll only consider dialogue with Raila Odinga after perhaps if any litigation is going to be taking place. But can't we avoid all of this if that dialogue came first? We keep pushing it, or it appears Jubilee rather keeps pushing it. Before the election, he said he would not have it until the election. The election has happened. He said, okay, now let's wait for any other process that may take place in between. But perhaps would the country avoid all of this if this dialogue actually took place?
I really get lost when people say that there is a dialogue so that things can be sorted, because I personally believe that dialogue, of course, as a first instance, is a continuous process, and that when Raila Odinga has an agenda that he thinks that he wants to discuss with the president's always been welcoming to discuss that issue, but not to go and dialogue with Raila Odinga on whether or not he won the elections or whether or not elections took place. But whether or not this country should be united, whether Uhuru Kenyatta, Raila Odinga now recognizes that Uhuru Kenyatta has been elected, and in his manifesto for NASA, he had certain things that he thinks that now the president was once should incorporate, that is welcomed. And that discussion can happen at any time. But it better happens when the president now has a mandate. He's now president-elect again. And so in another 21 days, a determination will have been made by 20th of November on his election if someone goes to Supreme Court. The last day will be 20th of November. Once that is done, he will be able to sit down and say, I have now been elected. I will invite Ukuru Okot, Raila Odinga, and Wainaina, and all these other candidates, including Dida, incorporate their manifestos for implementation. But not only them. There are many other Kenyans who have great ideas, but they never ran for presidency. They must be included in running the country. And that dialogue is continuous. When the president goes for those rallies, when he calls those meetings that you criticize when they meet in State House, when they go meet in State House Nakuru or have delegations, that is dialogue.
All right, final question. The president today announcing to the country that he did not assent to the changes to electoral laws. However, we are not aware of a memorandum that was sent back to Parliament, which should be due process if he's opposed or wants some changes to be made so the laws don't come in effect. In essence, as we speak right now, those amendments are now law. It's just that they've not been gazetted. So Did he mislead the country on one hand saying he didn't sign, but the laws are in place, sir?
The president didn't sign.
But they are in, he did not sign, but he also did not challenge any of the issues.
First of all, the president said he believes in the law. But because people thought that he was going to use it to his advantage in the 26th elections, he decided not to sign. Because if he had signed, it would have come into force too early for it to be applied in the elections on 26. Now, these laws are available for application of the 2022 elections. And that by operation of law, if the president had written a memorandum, he would have lied to the country to write a memorandum of a law that he believes that is a good law. What he did was to become pragmatic, that this is good law, but I am being accused of advantaging myself. Let this good law come into force after the elections so that it can be used for future elections, which includes elections 2022, 2027, and so forth. That was practical. Number two, if he wrote a memorandum, then he would have had to have an issue with any section of the law, which he doesn't. The only issue that was raised, by the way, that convinced anybody in this country was that the president should not sign the law and apply it to these elections because it will be akin to changing the rules midway. So practically, he just allowed the law to assent itself by operation of the Constitution after the 14 days, which happened after the elections was done, and which cannot be law until the day it's gazetted. Now, we will know which day it will be gazetted. It will no longer apply to these elections. We can now look forward to
So if we have another election, it will not be applied?
It will have another election, definitely will apply once it's gazetted. But assuming the gazettement doesn't happen for the next 1 year, it will not be law. It will not be operational. Right. But I hope and I believe, and most of us urge the president that it was a fantastic law, that it should have been signed before elections. But because he's a Democrat, he also appreciates and weighs various interests. No, not as opposed to us. Yeah. For us, we were looking at the best interest of the country as a whole. Okay. But the president looked at conflict of interest in the place and said, since I'm the one signing it, let me just let these elections pass, let it come into effect after.
Many thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Kipchumba Murkomen, the leader of majority in the Senate, speaking to us tonight. Yvonne.
Pia, interesting ones from there. And I think that is where we'll take it up now with Senator Moses Kajwang. Senator, good evening and thanks for joining us tonight on Kivumbi 2017. I want to start off where the majority leader has left. He says, we are done with elections. It's now time to move forward. What are your thoughts, Senator Kajwang, considering you come from a county that did not, in fact, participate in this election?
Thank you, Yvonne. I'm quite amazed that the Jubilee Brigade is all over town celebrating in a contest that pitted Uhuru against Kenyatta. Once Raila Odinga withdrew from the race, the outcome of this election was well known. In fact, we felt that considering the preparations and the process that went into these elections should not have been held in the first place. But they were held. Uhuru competed against Kenyatta, and we have seen what the outcome is. We still don't know what the accurate number in terms of turnout is. Even the Electoral Commission cannot tell us convincingly what was the percentage turnout or the exact number of people who voted. So we are where we were before the last elections that were nullified by the Supreme Court. It is also amazing that you would find a system that is intent on stealing or fiddling with numbers in a race where they did not have any competition. It is a race where even if 10 people voted, and 9 out of 10 voted for Uhuru Kenyatta, he still would have won. There was absolutely no need for them to fiddle with numbers and to create the kind of confusion that we have seen in the country. We saw the deputy president a day or two on CNN telling the entire world what the turnout was before the Electoral Commission had even established what the turnout was. So we are looking at numbers that had been fixed. We are looking at targets that had been set, and people are working backwards to ensure that those numbers are reached at. It is unfortunate that in a repeat election, which we expected would have been done in strict compliance with the Constitution, applicable laws, we are seeing the kind of messes, and some of them are even worse, are much more blatant than the ones we saw on 8th of August.
All right, Senator.
When Murkomen says that we are done with it, we really are not done with it. What matters is how have we gotten here? How have the numbers been generated? What has been the atmosphere? Yvonne, I can tell you, I have voted in 5 elections. And this is the only time I was not able to cast a vote. We must ask ourselves that even in the darkest days of Nyayoism, even in the toughest days when people were fighting for the repeal of Section 2A, some elections could still be held countrywide.
Okay.
We must ask ourselves,
Senator?
50 years down the line,
Senator?
how can we not be able to stage elections in every single polling station in the country?
Senator, I want to ask you this because even when Chebukati announced that they were postponing the vote in the 4 counties, that is Migori, Homa Bay, Kisumu and Siaya counties, we did see a lot of supporters from these regions live on television saying they did not want to participate in the vote. We saw roads being barricaded to prevent election materials and poll materials being delivered to these areas. So in a sense, it seemed like people in these 4 counties did not want to participate in the vote. So therefore, why the complaint about the impossibility of it, yet it doesn't seem like this was what was wanted on the ground by the voters there to begin with?
Yvonne, we are missing the point, and we are allowing propagandists to turn the narrative. The proximate cause or the root cause of the protest you saw in Luo Nyanza and in my county, for example, was the extrajudicial killings. It was the outright brutality of the police, outright brutality of militias. A lot of people in those counties died. They lost their lives, people who are not even protesting or demonstrating. And that did not start on the week of elections. That started much, much earlier. The state and the Electoral Commission absconded its duty to create an environment or atmosphere that would allow the people in these counties to participate in an election. It is not just the issue of the boycott, because when Raila Odinga withdrew and he said people don't go to vote, he did not say stop electoral materials from being delivered. What triggered the kind of spontaneous disruption and protest is the number of deaths. And I think if people are saying that we are done with the elections, they must also give us a tally of the people who have been killed in the 4 counties of Nyanza for us to say that we are done with it, because that would seem to be the sacrifice that some people are riding on to get into office.
So, Senator, let me ask you this. You just said now that Raila Odinga asked voters or his supporters to stay home, but did not necessarily ask that the voting material does not get to its destination. Granted. What would have happened if the polling material would have reached the polling centers? Would you have participated in this vote?
Well, this is an issue that we have discussed ad nauseum, that every Kenyan has a right to vote or to abstain from voting. But the fundamental thing is this. There's a narrative that we have done elections, we have done proper elections, that we have gotten an overwhelming mandate, when 4 counties out of 47 counties in this republic have not participated in an election. We must ask ourselves that, yes, you have staged something and you have made some announcements at Bomas, but is it the kind of midwifery that you'd be proud of, that has delivered a child that would be legitimate?
It was said, no October, no election. That is in October, right? What are your thoughts then now of this process? I know you said it wasn't an election and he was running against himself, but to be fair, even though he had a massive lead from the other candidates, he still did have other candidates on the ballot with him other than Raila Odinga, who chose to stay away. So what are your thoughts now? You said there would be no election in October, yet here we are with a president-elect this evening.
It's interesting that Raila Odinga, even after withdrawing, was still able to be number 2. Even after he had made it, the world knew that he was out of the race. When we said there would be no elections in October, we were making a distinction between two concepts that in Swahili we have reduced to bora uchaguzi versus uchaguzi bora. What were the grounds upon which the first election, which cost this country 40 billion shillings, were nullified? The first elections were nullified because we went into bora uchaguzi. We decided to do an election for the sake of it, for the sake of generating leaders, whether it is through computers or through other processes. We went into bora uchaguzi. We didn't want a situation where we go into another election in October and it turns out to be another bora uchaguzi kind of charade, which then ends in the Supreme Court, and then it is nullified, and we have to go through the entire cycle again. If you listen to conversation from business leaders, they will tell you that they are tired of this because they want to go back and focus on their business and generate wealth for themselves and wealth for the country. But if you go into a sham election, or an election where as a process there are certain things that you know are not correct, an election where the referee has promised the country that he is not sure that he's going to deliver free and fair elections. And indeed, Chebukati has lived up to his promise because he told us he cannot guarantee a free and fair election, and probably that is what we are seeing today. We should have taken heed. So we need to focus on that and look at the underlying issues, underlying reasons that prompted us to say that we are even willing to take the ultimate sacrifice and withdraw from this race. Okay. A lot of people think that Raila Odinga is in this for his own sake. And I've heard Murkomen make some references, and I listened to the speech of the president today and the speech of the deputy president. This is not about Raila Odinga. As an individual, he is fairly accomplished. I've seen even Jubilee people likening him to Nelson Mandela and telling him that he should not go to certain depths. As an individual, he has reached the height of self-actualization. Okay. But what about the lumpen proletariat, the people down there that he represents? That is a force that we are talking about. We are not talking about Raila Odinga as an individual. Okay, my final question to you, because I want us to complete the political conversation. You said you disagreed with the Senate Majority Leader Murkomen saying, when he said we're done with the elections and we move forward, you say we're not done. So what's next? Because we understand Raila Odinga, the NASA leader, will be issuing a statement tomorrow morning. So what next? Are you going to the Supreme Court? Are you carrying on with what was termed as the resistance movement? What can Kenyans expect from NASA in the days and weeks to come? I don't want to preempt what Raila Odinga is going to tell the nation tomorrow because he has to consult with his core principles and define a way forward. But from where I sit, there will be certain legal questions. Kipchumba Murkomen has alluded to them. Were elections conducted in the 290 constituencies in the Republic of Kenya? The Constitution says elections shall be conducted, not maybe. So there is no room for Chebukati to decide that he can or he cannot call elections in those areas. It is the responsibility of the government, which has the monopoly of power, monopoly of instruments of violence and instruments of peace, to ensure that there's an environment that can ensure the elections in 290 constituencies. But this is not an entirely legal problem. And in as much as the president anticipates that someone is going to the Supreme Court, which I suspect is going to send some surrogate litigants to take the force out of our sails, this is not a legal problem. This is a political problem. And I see two scenarios here, Yvonne. Number one, as NASA, we are committed to continue with our resistance. And we must look at the word political resistance not as a negative thing of going to the bush like Kony or killing people. Let us look at resistance from the lens of Martin Luther King, from the lens of people like Gandhi, from the activities that the ANC did in South Africa to break apartheid. We are committed and we shall proceed with resistance. It will be non-violent until we get to a point where every part of Kenya feels that they belong. The other option, Yvonne, which I hoped that the president was going to talk about, unfortunately, he ended up calling the other side witches, because he said that the elections were characterized by witchcraft. I didn't see cases of witchcraft. The deputy president said that other people are raising militias. They are not really trying to build a situation where Kenyans can come together. I would have advised that the president and his deputy, now that they've got this so-called new mandate, they need to move with speed and establish a national people's convention, because Kenya as a country is sick. And for Kenya to heal, we must sit down, we must find out what the root cause of our problems are.
Okay.
Kipchumba says that the problem is not about elections. But just the last point.
Please.
Elections are significant in Kenya because it is the only time when Kenyans decide to kill each other. And elections are important, especially at the national level, because of the kind of resources that still remain in the center. People ask me as a senator who's supposed to support devolution, why can't people focus on their counties? The fact is this: out of a 2.1 trillion annual budget, counties are only getting 300 billion. So that tells you that almost 80% of the national budget still remains in the center, which then can be dished out to people on the basis of the ethnic support that they bring in. So I see two scenarios. We shall continue resisting, but the middle ground is for us to convene a national convention, for us to dialogue, and then that can lead us into a situation where we can have a government that is representative of the aspirations and the desires of the people of Kenya.
All right, thank you very much. Senator Moses Kajwang, Homa Bay County, thanks for speaking with us. That is the political question we have been discussing. But when we return here on Kivumbi 2017, we'll be discussing the legal options. Indeed, both politicians we have spoken to tonight have alluded to that. And so, the lawyers who remain with me, Kibe Mungai and Steve Ogola, will be tackling this when we come back.